Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thank you for stopping by my channel. Welcome or welcome back. I am here with another day of the 31 Days of Tarot 2020, and today's video is for the prompt for day 22, which is to share our top 5 tarot decks of the last decade. So top 5 tarot decks of 2010 to 2019. If you've been watching my channel, even just for the 31 days, you will know that tops and favorites are something that I struggle with. I love the decks in my collection for different reasons, and you know it's really hard to say that this one's a favorite or this one's not a favorite. If you asked me my top 5 taco fillings, I would probably end up with a bunch of honorable mentions. Like I'm not good at this kind of ranking things, so that's a bit tricky. I've been dreading this one. So I also feel like another thing that's made this prompt difficult for me is that aside from my first tarot deck that I ever got, which was a gift from my family in like the very early 2000s, 2001, 2002, aside from that deck and the yellow box Rider-Waite-Smith deck, I didn't get any other decks until midway through the last decade, until 2014, 2015, or thereabouts. So since I've so far been defining the prompts in terms of, the like top decks in terms of when I got them as opposed to their actual publication date, that means that for top 5 tarot decks of the decade, basically every deck in my collection, would fit the criteria, which makes it obviously even harder to pick. So I have picked 5 tarot decks that I'm going to talk about, but I wanted to put a couple of parameters around what I mean by top 5, because this will maybe make more clear why I picked the ones that I did. So I'm picking decks that have have shifted my tarot practice or have affected me deeply, and decks that I have worked with a lot. So this video is going to kind of skew towards decks that I've had in my collection for longer. This has the added benefit, I think, of non-repetition. Some of the prompts, have been such that they could become very repetitive for me, as I've previously mentioned. So in this video, I've opted not to mention any of the 5 decks that I mentioned on day 2, and day 2 was our top 5 decks of 2019, and I talked about Tarot of the Magical Forest, the Next World Tarot, the Luminous Void Tarot, Tarot of the North Atlantic, and the Numinous Tarot. And so I have elected not to include any of those in this top 5. That is not because I don't think some of those might be in my top 5 for the decade, because they might well be. But they cannot possibly, having just joined me this year, or this past year, be the decks that I've worked with the most. Just statistics, So I've opted for non-repetition there. I've also opted, and this was just our choice that is somewhat arbitrary. I've decided to show, for the purpose of this video, only decks that are in print, or at least are in print in kind of some variety, because if I'm going to share a top 5 decks for me, maybe somebody who's out there watching will see one and think, oh, that's somebody's top 5 deck of the decade, and I've never seen that one, and I would love to work with that deck. And then to have like a list of 5 out-of-print decks, there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not saying like other people shouldn't put out-of-print decks in their top 5, but I made the decision not to, just, in case somebody wants to get one that I show. So, without further ado, top 5 tarot decks of 2019. All the way back to 2010. Actually, it's not just the top 5 of 2019, top 5 of the decade. The first deck that I want to show is in a box that I made for it, not the box that it came with, which I do have upstairs. And that's the Dust2 Onyx Tarot by Courtney Alexander. And this is from the first printing of this deck. I bought it very early on after it came out. I wasn't one of the backers. I just missed it. I didn't hear about it in time. But I had like pre-ordered it for right after that. And this deck is incredibly beautiful and deep and layered And this deck has given me incredible readings. It's not a deck that I would just pull out, you know, and work with just for any old, you know, any old time. I like to do, you know, bigger readings or readings at special times. You know, like on a solstice or an equinox or a birthday, or something like that. With this deck, the guidebook for this deck is incredible. You know, Courtney has, like, truly, like, it's a work of art. Everything about this deck, the kind of like production quality of this deck, so like the cardstock, the matte gold edging, the you know, the gold, the metallic gold of the text, and the bits of gloss you could see. You know, I don't have any deck that I would say, you know, comes close in a lot of ways to this one. I love her renamings of some of the majors and of the courts. I love her use of the eyes and features of various public figures in this deck, with reference to their birth charts and birth times. I love this this Empress as the Queen Mother. Having this deck out, I just want to hold it in my hands. You know, it is truly an incredible, very special deck. I have a little postcard print from this deck that came with mine in a frame in my room. I don't have very many framed tarot art in my room, but I have a few, and one of them is the Temperance card from this deck. And so there's really, I mean, this deck is, I could just like gush over this deck all day. And I haven't yet ordered, there's a travel version of this deck coming out, or out now actually. The travel version looks great too, and I haven't yet ordered it, and I'm on a depth here, but I must say, like, I am hoping that, yeah, I will probably end up ordering the travel size of the Dust2 Onyx as well. And I made this special box for it because the box it comes in was quite large, and my shelf is very shallow, and so it stuck out too much. But I, of course, still have like the box, and I have worked with and loved the guidebook, and so I keep a little piece of black onyx on top of this box, where it sits in a very special place on my shelf. So that's deck number 1. And these are, again, I've always said this of all the videos, this is in no particular order. It's not a, you know, 5th to 1st place or anything like that. This is just a top 5 as I've defined it. The next deck I want to pick is the Heart and Hands Tarot by Liz Blackbird. And this deck is the first indie deck that I ever bought. I got it on Etsy, which it is still available there. It's an all black and white deck. And of course, with the name Heart and Hands, there are a lot of hands in this deck. Some of the court cards remind me of celebrities. You know, I don't think they're specifically supposed to be celebrities, but they remind me of. And I should mention that this deck is one that I got and I water damaged, so I trimmed it. There's actually more border, you know, when you buy the deck, and it doesn't go right to the edge like this side is a bit cut off actually. But I really love this deck, and I think that this deck, you know, given that it's a black and white deck, it does do a good job, I think, in presenting various, you know, aspects of diversity in terms of ethnicity and sexuality and gender presentation, and things like this, as I look at the images anyway, which I appreciate. I just really love, you know, you can really get lost in the intricacies of the line work in this deck. And so with this being the first independent deck that I'd ever bought, I worked with this deck a ton. I do have 2 copies because the second that it got damaged, I went online just praying that, you know, it wasn't out of print and that I could be able to get it again. And I was lucky that I could. And there are just so many cards in this deck that I love, and it feels contemporary as well, but not the kind of contemporary that you know, certain kind of like contemporary can mean it's going to get dated really quickly, and this one doesn't feel that way to me at all. I love this Princess of Cups. There's princesses in this deck. I love all of the aces in this deck. I think that they really sum up their respective suits in interesting and effective ways. Yeah, so there's a ton that I love about this deck. I love this 6 of Swords with the scene in the background, and this is one of the decks. This is one of the decks that I can really imagine maybe inspiring a tarot tattoo for me in the future, because personal preference for tattoos, I prefer, at least on myself, like grayscale and black and shaded as opposed to color. So this would fit with some others that I have, and yeah. So it's the Heart and Hands Tarot by Liz Blackbird, another of the decks that I've worked with the most over the course of the decade. The third deck I'll mention, which you may know because I've shown it before in this bag that I made for it. This is actually the second indie deck that I ever bought. So it's another one that I've worked with a ton. And the moment I saw this one, it spoke to me, and it speaks to me ongoingly, this deck. And that is, of course, the Prism of Visions Tarot by James R. Eads. And James R. Eads has become a favorite deck creator and artist of mine. If you don't follow James R. Eads on Instagram, you are missing out. Get over there and follow. And you know the deck has to be special if it's a glossy one and it made it onto my list of top decks. I really like the way that the majors in this deck have a frame, but the minors are borderless and form panoramas and tell a story if you lay them out. So if you lay them out with aces on the left and across up to the kings, then they all, you know, blend together into one kind of storyline. I really like, and James R. Eads did not write the guidebook. Who wrote the guidebook? Catherine Toombs wrote the guidebook, and I like a lot about this guidebook, and in particular this guidebook, I like how it talks about the suit of wands in particular. So it talks about wands as being about creation, and it says they follow the journey of an idea from inception to manifestation. If you intend to safeguard a vision into self-sustaining vitality, you must show ambition, determination, and an ability to harmonize with others. But above all, have faith in yourself. Use your burning passion to forge something wonderful within. And then the way that it talks about each card in the wands has to do with this, you know, seeing something through. And I really like that. A lot of the depictions are quite unconventional, but certainly, you know, if you're familiar with a Rider-Waite-Smith system, you know, there will be a lot that you can, you know, you can recognize in this deck. And each deck comes with one special card that's an extra one depending on which edition of the deck that you buy. It comes with a different special card. And mine came with the card The Gift, which I do use. I don't use most of the time when there's a extra card in a deck, but I do with this deck. So it's another deck that I really love. And it was the first deck I ever had with gilding. And, oh, something special. So that is the Prism of Vision Tarot by James R. Eads. And there's also the Light Vision Tarot, which is the same illustrations but are kind of more monochromatic. And that one I've had for less time than the Prism of Visions, even though technically it came out first and then it went out of print and then it came back. And that one's beautiful also. So that's the Prism of Visions by James R. Eads. The fourth deck is a deck that I got when not even that long ago actually, but I got because I committed and decided to learning pip decks and Marseille style decks. And Marseille decks never really, a lot of them just visually didn't necessarily call out to me. But this one did, and it is a more recent Marseille style deck, and that's La Corte de Tarocchi, and it's by Anna Maria Donofrio, and it's published by the incredible, unparalleled Il Meneghello. I ordered this deck from Tarot BG, which is a website, as the name suggests, based in Bulgaria. It comes with this wax seal on the box, and let me tell you, an Il Meneghello deck is always, I think, a special thing, and this is the only one that I have. I have deck number 288 out of 400, and it comes with a little card that tells you that this item is created by hand. Any imperfections or variations are due to its workmanship and are not to be considered as defects. It's a special, and it has this kind of, the like an aura, the way that Walter Benjamin talks about aura almost. It has this kind of feeling about it, of really just being something special, I think. And it is a very thick deck. This cardstock is like straight up cardboard. It's very, very thick. It's not in the slightest bit is it bendy. I overhand shuffle, and that's fine. I didn't like the backs at first because they say La Corte de Tarocchi on the back, which I thought was like a little bit odd, but I can't nitpick this deck. I love this deck so much. And it's an unusual shape, tall and thin, like even more tall and thin than something like the Deviant Moon. So that's another thing that makes it unique. And I just love the faces in this deck. There's something so kind of charming about them. And I like the color palette is quite muted. And even though it is a fairly recently created deck, it has this kind of old feel to it, right? It's dated as Milan 2013, so it isn't a historic reproduction or anything like that. It is a newer deck to this decade, but it feels, like an older deck, and I love playing with this deck. I haven't worked with it for a while, and now having it out, it makes me want to look through it and just hold it again. I believe I first saw this deck on Tom Benjamin's channel. I know he loves this deck too. And at the time I wasn't sure that pip decks or Marseille style decks would be something that would be for me, but I came to it and decided to learn and have been learning and working with pip decks the last couple of years. And this is a deck that just reads beautifully. Yeah, love this deck. And it's another one that, you know, like the Dust2 Onyx, but it's different from the Dust2 Onyx, like, in lots of ways, obviously, but like the Dust2 Onyx, this is another deck that I just marvel at, like, the production itself, the stock and the box and the, you know, magic of lifting the lid and seeing this beautiful artwork. So that's La Corte Tarocchi by Anna Maria D'Onofrio. And the final deck that I've chosen to include, one of my absolute most used decks of the past decade, is a deck that I got during the past decade, but actually was not produced during the last decade. And this is Thea Tarot. It was printed in 1984. It's by Ruth West. And it is back in print on Metonymy Press. There's a new version of it. And I'm really glad that it got reprinted. And I got one of the 80s versions, so it is, the edges are yellowed and faded with time, and, you know, there are some marks on it here and there. Don't care. And this is a top deck for me because this was one of the first decks that I got that was a really explicitly queer deck. And, like, look at these, like, flannel shirts and going on a picnic. Like, of course I'm going to love this deck. You know, and now I have more explicitly queer, explicitly LGBT focused or created decks in my collection. But this one is still an absolute favorite. I love the style of art, this paper cutting style. You know I love a black and white deck. I love the diverse body shapes and body types in this deck. And I think there's some range and diversity of age as well, insofar as that is, like, specified in a medium like this. I really like the way that this deck reads so much. I like that there are the occasional card in landscape, even though the very vast majority of the cards are in portrait orientation. And, you know, working with a deck like this for the first time, really, like, I don't know, it really kind of drove home to me how important that is, and how important that is to me to have decks where I can feel immediately at home in, you know. There's a lot of cats in this deck. That's a bonus. So there's at least some anyway. There's a lot of fun fashions in this deck. Love it. So this is a deck that is very special to me, that I've worked with a ton. You know, that's explicitly feminist, explicitly, unabashedly queer centering, and that I love so much. And you know, it's the one out of this bunch that was not produced in this decade, but in terms of the decks that I've worked with the most in this decade, it's definitely up there. So that's my 5 for today. You know, with all the many caveats that I've listed. My top 5 for the decade: Dust2 Onyx, Heart and Hands, Prism of Visions, La Corte Tarocchi, and Thea Tarot. I am very interested to see what decks other folks pick for this prompt. And yeah, if you have any of the decks that I've shown and you love them too, let me know. If you don't make videos, but you have a top 5 decks of the decade that you would like to share with me, do leave a comment and say hi. I love the conversations that we've been having over the course of this month. Lots and lots of fun. Thank you again for watching if you've stuck with me for 24 minutes. Much appreciated, and I will see you tomorrow to talk about Oracle decks. Okay, so have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.